Hello, welcome back to Kim Reads as we continue with Misery 5. Rinse, he muttered and slid over to the right. This dragged his leg slightly askew, and the bolt of pain in his crushed knee was enough to wake him up. Less than 5 minutes had gone by. He could hear Annie washing dishes in the kitchen. Usually she sang as she did her chores. Today she was not singing. There was only a rattle of plates and the occasional hiss of rinse water. Another bad sign. Here's a special weather bulletin for residents of Sheldon County. Our tornado watch is in effect until 5 p.m. tonight. I repeat, a tornado watch. But it was time to repeat game. Time to stop playing games and get down to business. She wanted Misery back from the dead. That had to be fair. Not necessarily realistic, just fair. If he could do it this morning, he could derail the depression he sensed coming. Before it could get a real start. Paul looked out the window, his chin on the plane. He was fully awake now, thinking fast and hard, but not really aware of the process. The 2 or 3 players of his conscious mind, which dealt with things as he shampooed, as to whether or not Annie would be on time with his next dope allotment. Seemed to have departed the scene entirely. That part of his head had gone quietly out to get a pastrami on rye or something. There was some sensory output, but he was not doing anything with it. Seeing what he was seeing, not hearing what he was hearing. Another part of him was furiously trying out ideas, rejecting them, trying to combine them, rejecting the combinations he sensed going out, but in no direct contact within one and none. So dirty down with the sweatshops. He understood that he was trying to have an idea. Trying to have an idea wasn't the same as getting an idea. Getting an idea was just a more humble way of saying, I'm inspired. Or Eureka, my muse has spoken. The idea for fast cars had come to him one day in New York City. He had gone out with no more than buying a VCR for the townhouse on 83rd Street. He passed a parking lot and an attendant trying to jimmy his way into a car. That was all. He had no idea if he was seen or was licit or illicit. By the time he had walked another 2 or 3 blocks, he no longer cared. The attendant had become Tony Bonacero. He knew everything about Tony but his name, which later plucked from a telephone book. Half the story existed full-blown in his mind, and the rest was rapidly falling into place. He felt jivey, happy, almost drunk. This muse had arrived. Every bit as welcome and as expected, checked and mail. He had sent out a video recorder and had gotten something better instead. He had gotten an idea. This other process, trying to have an idea, was nowhere near exalted or exalting, but it was every bit as mysterious and every bit as necessary, because when you were writing a novel, you almost got roadblocked by somewhere, and there was no chance to go until you had an idea. His usual procedure when it was necessary to have an idea was to put on his coat and go for a walk. If he didn't need to have an idea, he took a book when he went for a walk. He recognized as good exercise, but it was boring. If you didn't have someone to talk to while you walked, a book was necessary. But if you need an idea, a boredom could just be roadblocked when chemotherapy was to a cancer patient. Halfway through fast cars, Tony killed Lieutenant Guy when Lieutenant tried to slap the cups on him in a Times Square movie theater. Paul wanted to get Tony away with the murder for a while anyway, because there could be no third act with Tony just sitting in the cooler. Yet Tony could not simply leave Gray in the movie theater with half a knife sticking out of the left armpit, because there was at least 3 people who knew Gray had gotten to meet Tony. Body disposal was a problem, and Paul didn't know how to solve it. It was just roadblock. It was the game. It was the careless, just killed the guy in Times Square movie theater. Now he's gone body back without saying anything. Hey, mister, is that the guy as dead as he looks, or he's just sitting a pitch a fit or something. If he gets Gray Quartz back in his car, he can drive it to the Queens and dump it in this abandoned building pit he knows about. Polly, can you? There is no 10-second line, of course. He had no contact for the book, just written in a spec, and hence there was no delivery delay to think about. Yet there was always a deadline, a time after which he would have to leave the circle, and most writers knew it. The book remained roadblock long enough. It began to decay, to fall apart. All the little tracks and it started to show. He was gone for a walk, thinking on top of his mind the way he was thinking about on top. He had written 30 miles before someone set up a flare from the sweatshops below. Suppose he starts a fire in the theater. That looked like it might work. There's no sense of giddiness, no true feeling of inspiration. Felt like a carpenter, looked like a piece of lumber that might just do his job. He could set a fire in the building next to him. How's that? Goddamn seats in those theaters are always torn up. There'd be smoke, lots of it. He could hold off leaving the leaves as long as possible and then drag Gray out with him. He could pass Gray off as a smoke inhalation victim. What do you think? He still thought that was okay. Not great, but there was plenty of death still to be worked out, but it looked okay. He had an idea. The work could proceed. Never had needed to have an idea to start a book, but he understood instinctively that it could be done. He sat quietly in a chair, chin in hand, looking out in the barn. If he had been able to walk, then he would have been able to the field. He sat quietly among almost dozing, waiting for something to happen, really aware of nothing at all except things were happening down below. The whole edifices of make-believe were being erected, judging, found wanting, and torn down in the blink of an eye. 10 minutes passed, 15. Now she was running the vacuum cleaner parlor, but still not singing. He heard it, but nothing with the lead hearing of it. It was connected, which ran to his head and then out again like running water through a flume. Finally, the guy shot down below a flare, as they always eventually did. Poor buggers down there were never stopped busting their balls. And he didn't envy them one little bit. Paul sat quietly, beginning to have an idea. His conscious mind returned. The doctor is in. He picked on the idea like a letter pushed through a mail slot in the door. He began to examine it. He almost rejected it. That was that faint groan from down there in their sweatshops. Reconsider, decide half of it could be saved. A second flare, this one brighter than the first. Paul began to drum, his fingers restlessly on the windowsill. Around 11 o'clock, he began to type. This went very slowly. Individual clacks followed by spaces of silence, some as long as 15 seconds. It was the aurora equivalent of the island arpeggio seen from the blue air, a chain of low hums broken by swans of blue. Little by little, the spaces of silence began to shorten, and now there were occasional bursts of typing. It sounded fine on Paul's electric typewriter, but the clacking sound of the royal was thick, actively unpleasant. But Paul did not notice the Ducky Dowdle's voice of the typewriter. He was warmed up by the bottom of the first page. By about the second, he was in high gear. After a while, Annie turned off the vacuum cleaner and stood in the doorway watching him. Paul had no idea she was there. Had no fact that he was. He had finally escaped. He was in little Dunthorpe's churchyard, eating damp night air, smelling moss and earth and mist. He heard the clock and the type of the Presbyterian struck two and dumped it in the story without missing a beat. When he was very good, he had seen through the paper. He could see it now. Annie watched him for a long time, her heavy face unsmiling, moveless, but somehow satisfied, and after a while, she went away. Her tread was curvy, but Paul didn't hear that either. He worked until 3 o'clock that afternoon, and then 8 at night he asked her to help him back in the wheelchair again. He wrote another 3 hours, although by 10 o'clock the pain began to be quite bad. Annie came in at 11. He asked for another 15 minutes. No, Paul, it's enough. Here's why I saw. She got into bed and he was asleep in 3 minutes. He slept the whole night through for the first time coming out of the gray cloud, and his sleep was only for the first utterly without dreams. He had been dreaming awake. And that's the end of that chapter. See you later.